Well, let me welcome all of you and introduce myself. I'm Deena Hurwitz. I teach the Human Rights Clinic here and direct the Human Rights Program. On behalf of the Human Rights Program and the J.B. Moore Society of International Law, the Black Law Students Association, the Domestic Violence Group, and I know I'm forgetting somebody. Forgive me. Thank you. Virginia Law Women. We have a wonderful set of co-sponsors for this event, so I want to thank both our co-sponsors and all of you who are part of that group and who came out to join us today. I also want to introduce, just very quickly, and then we'll say more in a minute, our speakers. We're very, very fortunate to have Eramithe Delva here. Eramithe is a co-founder and co-director of KOFIV, which is a Haitian organization. The KOFIV is short for Commission thank you. Femmes Victimes pour Femmes, which is the Commission of Women Victims for Victims. This started before the earthquake, but obviously has had a lot to do since the earthquake. And Tamara Brown, with whom I went to Haiti in May, and I'll introduce them both a little bit more in a minute. I also want to introduce one of your colleagues, Gabriel Hippolyte, who's a first-year law student, a Haitian American, who will be translating for us. Thank you very much. And I will also mention that we have another another student from Grounds who had a class until 11:45 to 12, so she'll be joining us and sitting in. Her name is Anya Tournier. I want to also just mention, as we get started, what is the build-up to this panel. Since the earthquake, I think many of you know, some of you perhaps don't know, but there was a lot of organizing on Grounds and at the law school, a group called Who's for Haiti, and Law Who's for Haiti did quite a bit of work last year in raising money to send down to Haiti to help with the earthquake. And one of the students in the law school, Amber Williams, who herself has been living with her family, lived in Haiti for quite some time, was one of the students who really helped to organize that, and she herself was in Haiti during the earthquake. And I wanted to mention that the Who's for Haiti raised something like $60,000. $18,000 was raised at the law school alone. So that's something that we should be proud of. And all throughout last semester, the spring semester, we tried to put together a panel, and for one reason or another, we just weren't able to do it last semester. But the fortune is all of yours, because we wouldn't have had the privilege of having Eramithe and Tamara here if we had done it last year. So we're actually pretty lucky that we had to wait. Just before we get started hearing from our speakers, I wanted to give a very little bit. Actually, before I do that, let me explain just a little bit about KOFIV and also about Tamara. As I mentioned, KOFIV was established before the earthquake. It's an organization that was established by and for rape survivors, from the poorest areas of Port-au-Prince, and the group works in Port-au-Prince. KOFIV combines support for individual women with the power of grassroots women's organizing to work on, to really transform the underlying conditions that give rise to sexual violence against the poor. And I want you to understand that there are, of course, many women's organizations in Haiti, but KOFIV is unique in that they are poor women who are working for and with other poor women. Many of the other organizations are either middle class or even upper class. One of the things that's really important about the strategy that KOFIV pursues is that they work to seek justice for rape survivors by partnering with Haitian lawyers to pursue cases, and also with international organizations like the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti, when we have Tamara Brown representing the IJDH, and also the Bureau des Avocats Internationaux, or the BAI as it's known, which is the Haitian partner of the IJDH. And they're really working with women in the camps. Tamara, who I will introduce now and then I won't have to do it again, was a federal law clerk for the U.S. Bankruptcy Court of the U.S. Virgin Islands. She studied international law and international human rights at the Institute of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France. If any of you are interested in that program, I highly recommend that you talk to Tamara. Interestingly, she worked in the private sector. She worked in the in private trust as a vice president. Okay, with the PNC, National Bank, but has recently left that job to pursue international human rights work more fully. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Tamara, and I didn't really know until we sort of tried to bring her here for this visit, is that she was an officer in Balsa. And some of you may know that Balsa is working towards the possibility of sending a team of students down to Haiti to help do sort of a pro bono winter term or winter week. So that's helpful. Just to begin with, before I turn the program over to Eramithe, I wanted to give some very brief context for the problems in Haiti. We could spend hours talking about what the problems are in Haiti, but it's probably enough to say that before the January 12th earthquake, Haiti ranked 149th out of 182 countries in the World Bank's Human Development Index. And Haiti also ranked 97 out of 135 countries in the World Bank's Human Poverty Index. I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone in this room that the earthquake turned an already severe crisis in the country into a catastrophe. And I'm sure that you all, if you don't know much about Haiti, I'm sure you know that Haiti has suffered under brutal dictatorship for many, many years. The earthquake on January 12th killed more than 200,000 people. It injured 300,000 people and left over 1 million homeless. The current internally displaced persons, the IDP is a term that refers to people who are effectively made refugees, but we don't call them refugees if they don't cross borders. So IDP is the term for internally displaced person. The current IDP population in Haiti is estimated at 2.1 million people. Now that's out of an estimated 9.8 million in the population. In some areas, literally 82% of the population now lives in an IDP camp. There are perhaps 1,368 formal IDP camps. That means recognized by the UN with more than 100 individuals living there. And the IDPs are largely concentrated in 4 areas of the country that were hardest hit by the earthquake. But for our purposes, particularly because KOFIV works in Port-au-Prince, it's worth knowing that 2/3 of those sites and more than half the people are in Port-au-Prince. There's something like, there's more than 1,500,000 IDPs in 875 sites, IDP camps in Port-au-Prince alone. 53% of the registered population in the camps is female. 38% are under the age of 18. And 9% are under the age of 5. 60% are adults of working age. You'll hear much more detail about what the problems are that IDPs, and particularly women, face, but the main problems are infrequent food and potable water distribution, completely insufficient sanitation and washing facilities, inadequate security, especially for vulnerable populations like women and children, and inadequate and unsafe temporary housing. Most of the people are living in tarps, which are both inadequate protection from the elements and also completely inadequate to keep intruders out. So I forgot to mention that the report that we published after our delegation in May is available up here. Maybe we should have somebody, Erin, could you just put these in the back? I'll just do two here. Please take them. If you don't get a chance to pick one up at the end of the program, we can get you more copies, or I can email them to you. But this report on the rapes in the IDP camps was put together with the IJDH and particularly with the assistance of Eramithe and her colleagues in KOFIV. So the topic of our panel, obviously, is the severe crisis of safety and security for Haitian women, especially the poor women, because the people living in the camps are poor. The women, especially, as I say, the poor women have been excluded, pretty much fully excluded from participation and leadership in the relief effort, which is really an important aspect of the problem. So what do women do when they're left out? They organize. And Eramithe and Malia, her colleague, started to work with rape survivors in the camps, partnering with the BAI, providing places for victims to go after the rapes, giving them food, helping them get to health centers and so forth. I'm going to stop there, let Eramithe tell you the stories, and Tamara and I will follow up with some more details about the report and about what's happening since then. Because of the translation, it'll go a little slow. Eramithe is going to speak in Creole, and obviously Gabe is going to translate into English. So Eramithe, we'll ask you to speak slowly so that he can translate as we go along. And you should feel free to say, just hold on so he can translate.
Sure.
And please speak into the microphone.
Okay. Merci, Deena.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Et m'di tout moun bonjour.
She says, good morning to everyone.
Et non pas moi, c'est Eramithe Delva.
My name is Eramithe Delva.
Moi sorti Haïti.
I come from Haiti.
C'est une joie pour moi matin pour m'en mitan nou.
It is a joy for me to be here amongst all of you.
Et pour m'capable expliquer nous plus bien comment situation Haïti a évolué.
For me to explain the situation in Haiti in terms of rape.
Pour m'capable parler nous un peu tout des organisations moi-même moi représenter.
And also to speak about the organization that I represent.
Et moi représenter une organisation qui c'est KOFIV.
I represent an organization that calls itself KOFIV.
KOFIV c'est Commission Femmes Victimes pour Victimes.
KOFIV is the Commission of Women Victims for Victims.
C'est une organisation qui prend naissance depuis mars 2004.
It's an organization that was founded in 2004.
Et c'est une organisation qui prend naissance par un groupe femmes.
It's an organization that was started by a group of women
qui étaient déjà victimes de violences sexuelles.
That were already victims of sexual assault.
Et ça a bien expliqué, Commission Femmes Victimes pour Victimes.
And this is why the title of his KOFIV, Victims for Victims.
Et ça a tout expliqué nous tout moi-même qui devant nous là c'est une victime.
And this is also to tell you that I am also a victim.
moi été victime pendant l'époque dictature militaire en Haïti.
I was a victim underneath the military dictatorship during the 1990s.
C'est une situation tout qui te cause moi te perdu mari.
This is also one of the reasons that I've lost
Oui.
that she has lost her husband.
Et en Haïti, c'est nous capable dire son pays à chaque fois gagne un problème et qu'a traversé, c'est toujours femme active qui plus victime.
In Haiti, every time that there's a political situation, most likely it's usually the women who are victims.
Et nous-mêmes, mesdames, ça qui étaient victimes pendant l'époque dictature militaire, nous te mettons tête nous ensemble pour nous être capables de chercher justice.
Us, the women who were victims of forms of sexual assault under the dictatorship, we formed together to figure out we would want to find justice.
Et malgré toute bataille nous t'es arrivé faire,
in spite of all the battles that we had to undergo,
nous capables dire nous t'es victime cause de appartenance politique nous pour président Aristide. Président Aristide vient retourner dans le pays, nous pas jamais joindre justice.
even though we were victims when Aristide was president, we still didn't find any forms of justice.
Et puis il était venu prendre un autre mandat encore.
And then he made another mandate.
Après en 2004, président Aristide vient aller.
In 2004, when President Aristide was exiled from the country.
Constat nous même mesdames qui étaient déjà victimes ça été fait nous et fait commencer des femmes qui continuent à victime.
They noticed that there were still situations that were arising, that there were a lot of sexual assaults against women.
Et puis ça que victime avant, il y a un pile parmi eux qui mourit avec sida.
And those who were victims of sexual assault, she's encountered a lot of diseases such as AIDS that occurred amongst them.
Et notre travail nous t'ai fait, nous t'ai réuni encore pour nous t'ai capable changer stratégie nous.
And so they wanted to meet again to rectify their strategy.
Au lieu de travailler seulement pour joindre justice,
against only first trying to find forms of justice.
mais kounya, nous t'ai vinn mettre KOFIV sous pied, en même temps n'a cherché justice, mais chercher accompagnement médical, ak accompagnement psychosocial tout.
But aside from just finding justice for the women, they also wanted to have a form of strategy where they would be able to aid the women in terms of bringing them to clinics and also giving them forms of psychological help and awareness after the sexual assault.
C'est raison ça qui fait nous te mettre KOFIV sous pied.
And this is the reason why that they have founded KOFIV.
Et travail nous fait dans KOFIV.
The work that we do in KOFIV.
Et nous travaillons avec mesdames qui victimes de violences sexuelles.
We work with women who are victims of sexual assault.
Violence conjugale.
Women who are victims of sexual assault within families.
Nous travaillons avec mesdames tout qui obligées de vendre corps en prostitution pour vivre.
They also work with women who have undertaken prostitution in order to live in Haiti.
Et puis ti moun tout qui vivent dans domestique.
And young youth who live within families that have domestic sexual assault occurring within their families.
Puis gros objectif nous gain c'est bataille pour faire droit femmes actives respecter dans le pays d'Haïti.
The biggest objective, main objective, is to have women's rights in Haiti and have that respected.
Et accompagnement nous bail mesdames yo les victimes. Nous bail accompagnement médical.
When a person is a victim, they automatically give them forms of medical attention.
Psychosocial.
Psychological attention.
Et puis nous gain travail ça pour nous faire nous gain un groupe agent communautaire.
And this work is done through a committee of agents that they have located within the communities where sexual assault is prevalent.
Nous capable dire agent ça c'est plus gros réseau nous gain dans KOFIV.
And this community that they have with their agents is one of the biggest zones that they have within the several different tents in Shantytown.
Et c'est de mesdames yo qui étaient victimes yo même.
And these members within the community are people who've also been victims of sexual assault.
Qui viennent bay tête yo comme volontaires qui pour travailler avec mesdames qui victimes actuelles.
Who have volunteered to give assistance to help other people who have fallen under forms of sexual assault.
Nous connaissons bon proverbe qui dit souvent passer maladie ou pas qu'on remède. Ça veut dire mesdames ça yo même yo te victime yo kon douleur une femme l'elle victime.
There's a Haitian phrase that goes, if you haven't been a victim, then you don't know how to aid or assist someone who has been a victim. So their main objective as being victims, they know how to help and understand the problems of people who have been victims of sexual assault.
Et c'est une stratégie tout qui permet nous faire travailler nous plus bien.
And this is one of the strategies that help them to undergo their objective the best way possible.
Et parce que les moun nan konnen moun sa k'ap travail avec nan ou bien k'ap travail pour moi c'est yon moun qui te victime même so avec les ça li plus à l'aise pour capable parler ensemble avec.
And when you're a victim of a sexual assault, it's always easier for you to talk to someone else who has also been a victim of sexual assault.
Et puis nous travaillons tous sur question éducation.
And they work a lot onto the questions of educating.
Nous capable dire mesdames ça qui nous capable dire victimes. Yo c'est des victimes qui sorti dans quartier qui pi pauvre dans pays d'Haïti.
Now these victims are people who usually come from the sectors that are the most impoverished in Haiti.
Parfois yo pas gen moyen pour envoyer petit yo l'école.
At times these women don't have any forms of way to send even their children to school.
Yo pas même gen moyen pour yo bay un plat chaud par jour.
They don't even have the means to give some form of hot meal day by day.
Et KOFIV nous former yon l'école primaire pour ti moun petite mesdames sa yo.
KOFIV has formed a school to aid the children of these victims, these women who have been victims, by forming a school to help them with their children.
Et puis ti moun tout qui nan reste avec.
And the children also who have been victims will be in the school.
Dans l'école sa tout nous réinsérer ti moun tout yo te obligé forcer aucun bezam pour yo te capable ba ti monnaie pour yo manger.
In the school, it was one of their objectives to help them have some form of food so that they could actually have something to live upon.
Dans l'école ça nous gen psychologue qui travaille ti moun yo.
In the school, they have a psychiatrist who works with the children.
Animateur sportif, animateur culturel.
They have professors who do sports and cultures also.
Et puis nous capable dire professeur yo tout.
And also with the ranging of other academic professors.
OK. Et l'autre travail nous fait c'est formation professionnelle pour jeunes.
The other work that they do is helping these victims in terms of gaining some form of work within the public environment.
Nous connaissons les un jeune en don pays, nous ka dit c'est avenir pays ya.
The youth is always represented as the future of a country.
Mais en Haïti, jeunes yo qu'on obligé faire n'importe bagay yo même pour yo capable vivre.
But in Haiti, the youth is restricted to doing whatever means possible for them to live.
Parce que yo pas gen encadrement bon côté l'état, moun ki responsable yo pas vraiment prendre responsabilité yo.
Because the state has not taken full responsibility for the youth in terms of some sort of social work.
Yon ti moun qui pou ta l'école parfois li obligé à faire commerce ou bien la vendre col dans prostitution.
Children who don't go to school are usually not going to school because they're required to engage in some form of prostitution to make ends meet or to become some form of salesperson in the street.
Nous former l'école professionnelle pour yo, côté que yo apprendre yon bagay, avec ça yo apprendre vinn servir yo comme un outil pour yo capable vivre.
They've formed the school also as a trade school to help them find different means to live aside from prostitution or just working straightly in the streets.
Et puis l'autre travail nous fait microfinance pour mesdames yo pour yo capable reprendre la vie yo.
And they also, another program that they have is that they work with the women in terms of micromanagement in forms so they can re-enter into society after they've been assaulted.
Et puis, avant tremblement de terre, nous ka dit KOFIV te gen yon clinique côté li te kon bay mesdames yo accompagnement médical.
Before the earthquake, there was a clinic that they had that gave these women's forms of medical assistance and attention.
Mais après tremblement de terre, nous te vinn perdre clinique ça.
But after the earthquake, they've lost their clinic.
Mais ça va empêcher nous faire travail là.
But that doesn't impede us from doing our work.
Et moi-même, c'est un moun après tremblement de terre qui t'a vivre dans un camp.
But I am one of the people who've actually lived in the tent cities.
C'est un camp côté qui gen en pile messieurs évadés prison qui violé mesdames.
And this was a tent that had a lot of former prisoners who have escaped, who were undergoing a lot of raping in the tent.
Nous te travaillons dans ça avec en pile pression.
They worked within these tents with a lot of pressure.
Mais ça va t'empêcher nous continuer travail.
But that didn't impede us from doing our work.
Nous capable dire 12 janvier, c'est un jour nous même femmes nous pas jamais oublier.
The 12th of January was a day that they have not been able to forget.
C'est un jour qui quitte en pile de l'eau dans les yeux dans famille haïtienne.
It's a day that has brought a lot of tears to a lot of families in Haiti.
C'est un jour nous capable dire qui quitte en pile si moun orphelin.
It's a day that has left a lot of children orphaned.
En pile femme veuve,
A lot of women,
veuve.
widowed,
Et puis qui te en pile violence et discrimination.
and has given rise to a lot of discriminatory violence.
M'pa konnen si nous parler de camp.
When we speak of camps,
C'est pas comme si parfois les vacances, gen ti moun qui kon al en camp,
it's not like summer camp that you usually see within the state.
peut-être là yo kon apprendre quelques bagay.
You learn something.
Mais quand ça yo c'est de nous capable dire c'est de côté nous capable nous te ka dire c'est mot tant kou jeng comme si c'est son côté qui gagne en pile violence et puis c'est pas un côté qui semble côté pour moun t'a vivre.
These camps aren't really a place where you'd have fun. This is a place where you wouldn't want to live, even though that they're required to live there.
Gen moun qui capable joindre accès à un temps pour plus facile même laisser en bas en plastique mais quand même li dormi puis bien.
There's some people who have access to tents, but these are tarps or these are forms of plastic just for them to be able to sleep better.
Mais gen moun qui obligé c'est morceau drap, morceau plastique yo maré pour yo capable barrer soleil.
But the other people who've not been privileged enough to find tents are usually required to find some form of plastic or cardboard just to protect them from the sun.
Mais la pluie ça vraiment difficile pour yo avec petit yo pas capable dormir, yo obligé camper, faire toute nuit là pendant la pluie.
But the situation for women is extremely grave, especially when they're dealing with children and they're trying to find some form of way to nourish them.
Et puis après la pluie fin tomber, côté ça gen en pile la boue. C'est tant qu'au côté yo gade on bête que les cochons en Haïti.
And also during the raining season, it's extremely difficult for people to live in tents because there will be a lot of mud. And the mud is described as a form of, they'll make us feel as if we're pigs.
Ou ka comprendre yon peuple a vivre dans situation comme ça et puis il va même gen sécurité côté la vivre là.
You can't imagine for people to live in this type of dire situation, there isn't even security that would follow.
Pas gen présence la police.
There isn't any form of police presence.
Et nous connaissons gen yon force militaire étranger qui nan pays ta communista.
They know that there is some form of military force from the United Nations.
Yo pas présent dedans camp yo.
But they're not allowed to be in the camp.
Côté qui gen moun qui vraiment besoin sécurité.
Where people really need forms of security.
Parfois mesdames yo kon en difficulté, yo kon victime dans camp, les yo aller bon côté la police, yo pas vraiment joindre accompagnement la police.
When people have been or when women have been sexually assaulted, at times when they go to the police to discuss the situation at hand, the police usually ignore the matter.
Capable ba nou exemple moi-même
An example.
Et gen une situation comme ça qui arrivé.
There was a situation similar to this that has arisen.
Dans camp côté m'ta vive.
In the camp that I was living in.
Et moi gen une petite fille qui gen 17 ans.
There was a lady who was 18 years old.
Et puis pendant 7 heures du soir, elle était sortie pour aller acheter un bagage pour le manger.
And when she left her tarp to go get something to eat, to purchase something to eat.
Et puis gen un jeune garçon qui prend Mel.
There was a young man who grabbed her hand.
Et puis la traîné pour capable rentrer en bas on tente ensemble avec elle.
Who dragged her so they could enter into the tent together.
Pour capable violer.
So he would be able to rape her.
Et puis mais dans organisation même les non dans organisation mais petite nous toujours ba formation yo même tous les yo en danger qui réaction yo doit gagner.
Even with her organization, they usually try to assist women who have been victims or potential victims by telling them what to do when you would be under the situation where someone would be dragging you or trying to rape you.
Nous toujours dit les ou en danger les amre.
When you are in danger, you would yell.
Goumer ensemble à moun autant que capable.
Fight with the person as much as you're able to resist.
Et Merlin te fait ça, monsieur a te kembel, littéralement maintenant même monsieur et puis te bay monsieur en calotte.
So she was able to actually beat her offender and the person who was trying to rape her by these forms of instructions that they had given people.
Et puis après elle te gouma avec li couri.
And after she fought with him, she ran.
L'autre monde devine paraître et puis monsieur a te vinn obligé pas ka faire rien.
She was able to rejoin her family and then the guy was unable to do anything with her.
Merlin retourne, elle rentre en battant côté nous dormi.
But he returned later on that night to where they were sleeping.
Monsieur Sal te suive Merlin,
He followed her.
li rentre en battant lan.
He entered into.
Li te vini avec deux lot encore.
Came with two more people.
Youn la dan ou te gen zam.
One of them had a weapon.
Te gen kek moun nan kan ki te sorti vin pale ansam avè li pou yo te kapab maîtriser l.
There were people who were in the camp who tried to come and tell him to calm the situation.
Et puis moi-même moi te di Malia et l'autre collègue moi qui nan KOFIV, m'te di li nous pas arrêter garder ça comme ça, on aller dans commissariat pour n'al porter plainte.
So her and the other co-founder Melina, they saw the situation. They said that they have to rectify this. So they went to a police officer and they went to the police bureau.
Et puis là nous te rivé dans commissariat et puis te gen on tape dehors, pas de bon espace qui te réservé si yon moun vini li victime pour capable parler en confidentiel avec police là.
And when they arrived at the police office, they noticed that there was just a table and there was no place for a woman who has been assaulted to come and talk to a police officer in private.
Et puis m'te campé en face police là, m'a expliqué et fait m'a expliqué ça qui passé.
So she went up to the police officer to explain the situation that has arisen within the two guys who tried to rape the young woman.
Mais li pas prend au sérieux.
But the police officer didn't take her seriously.
Même pas jam décourager, m'te campé en face, m'te dit chef là. Et moi quoi la police là li là pour protéger ses vies.
But she wasn't discouraged and she stayed in front of the police officer and told him that this is one of your obligations to serve and protect.
Mais pour qu'on y a moins en danger dans camp, c'est ça que fait nous venir chercher secours non mais.
And since it's your obligation to serve and protect, this is why we have come in front of you since we are endangered in the camp.
Et puis li di yon lot et dame ça petite qui subit tentative viol dans camp. L'autre la dit ça pas problème non.
And so when she explained the situation about the raping to the police officer, he informed her that it wasn't their problem.
Ça c'est problème Préval.
This is the problem of the president, Préval.
Poto ka comprendre nous pas ket moun et yon pas kon l'autre la gen non camp. Bagay ça dépassé nous toute journée son seul plainte et ka déjà dans place pétion.
And since this situation is out of the care of our abilities, we are unable to assist. That's what the police officer said.
Moi te di m'pa déplacer sans que m'pa joindre on support nan men nou.
And she informed him that she will not move until he finds some way to rectify the situation.
Et puis pour yo te capable comme da dit ça débarrasser ensemble avec yo te dit vire sous place là ou après une machine qui écrit 1-417 ou expliquer le cas la aider yo.
So to get her to move and leave the police bureau, they informed her that go find the police car that's named
1-417.
That was one of the inspection. There was the number, I believe. So he said.
Oui. C'est un numéro qui sous machine policière.
But one of it is just they told the informant to go to a police officer's car that was marked, and he'll take care of the situation.
Et puis vraiment vrai, l'aime te viré pas trop loin des camps côté mieux, m'te joindre machine là, m'expliquer policier à ça, li dit et côté monsieur a. M'di m'te quitté en battante là et li te continue à bailler pression. Li dit bien rentrer sous joindre ni Kimbel et puis warele.
And so when she did find the marked car to inform her of what occurred, the police officer informed her that where's the man who's tried to rape the women. She said that it was at the bottom of the tent camp where they had left him. He said, well, then go and find them and hold them for us, and we'll come and do something.
Ka comprendre problème et yon moun lo victime en Haïti.
You can understand the situation if you're a victim in Haiti.
Mais après ça te fin passé, yon nan bagay nou te vin wè. Nou te wè c'est ou moun c'est ou même qui doué ve ko.
After this situation, we saw that it falls upon us also to try to protect ourselves.
Parce que en Haïti, en pile groupe, en pile organisation a parlé de violence sous femme.
Because there are a lot of organizations that talk about violence against women.
Mais pas gen rien qui fait pour faire prévention.
But there are not a lot of actions that are being taken to actually prevent these situations from arising.
Quoi li plus important pour dans moment ça là, au lieu compter quantité cas de viol, faire une prévention capable plus facile.
I believe it's more important to find some form of prevention of these forms of rape instead of just categorizing what types of violence have occurred and what type of rapings have occurred in Haiti.
Après moment ça, nous t'es obligé nous-mêmes créer un système autodéfense.
After this situation that has arisen, we decided it was very important to create some form of self-defense.
Et avec support BAI, JDH.
With the support of the IGDH and BAI.
Et nous t'ai fait recherche et avec des pour te joindre flash et puis sifflet. Flash.
So they after this they were able to find whistles and flashlights as forms of self-defense.
OK. Et flash yo, yon nan raison fait nous te plus fait demande flash.
The reasons why they've asked for flashlights.
Éclairage c'est yon nan cause.
The darkness is one of the reasons.
Violence pour femme en Haïti actuellement.
Why rapings occur in Haiti.
Quand yo pas gen assez d'éclairage.
When there isn't enough lighting.
Et puis toilette yo tout yo on ti jan reculé de quand ça veut dire on ti jan loin de côté quand yo.
Also you see a lot of sexual assaults that occur within the restroom situation since they're further away from the camp.
Et parfois mesdames yo obligé sortir dehors quand pour yo aller dans toilette le soir.
And at times women have to leave the camps to go to the restrooms.
Ça compte cause yo victime tout.
Those are also places that sexual assault would occur. In the porta potties.
Okay.
The restrooms would be away from the camp.
Comment nous créer système autodéfense là avec sifflet? Nous bay mesdames yo formation.
The way that they did the system of self-defense with the whistles or by giving the women information.
Comment pour yo protéger sifflet ça?
And how to protect themselves with the whistles.
Et puis c'est un sifflet qui permet c'est même gens ou engage les amre gen moun ki tande ki vinn sauver ou.
It's the same way if you blow on the whistle that you'd be able to call someone to come to assist you and help you.
Même ça pi bon toujours parce que un moun qui gen sifflet a et puis l'el tande yon l'autre moun siffler et puis li connaît son ça et puis li même li siffler tout moun rencontre ensemble pour yo capable sauver moun ça qui est en difficulté.
But the reason why a whistle is even better than just yelling is because if you hear the whistle and you are a person who has a whistle, you'll be able to identify that some form of sexual assault is coming. So you'll be able to gather more people to come in with this and prevent this crime from happening.
Mais nous fait ça avec un pile précaution parce que dans cas côté gen kan qui gen nèg qui gen zam.
But we're doing this with a lot of precaution because there are within camps that people do have some forms of arms.
Si nan moment yo ken bo siffler yo capable ben tuer même.
Because if a person did come under some form of sexual assault and you whistle, the man is likely to actually kill you for whistling and or the person trying to receive some form of help.
Allez-y, c'est pour montrer et nous gen police nationale la te sorti un rapport. Il te dit en Haïti gen plus passé 1000 camps après tremblement de terre.
The police department in Haiti has released a report that there are more than 1 million camps in Haiti.
Mais gen présence la police seulement dans 6 camps.
But there's only police presence in 6 of these camps.
Ka comprendre
so you can understand
comment situation est.
The gravity of the situation.
Si nous t'a parlé de questions légales là en Haïti.
If we speak about the question of legality in Haiti.
Et parfois en pile mesdames yo qui victimes yo peur porter plainte.
A lot of times women who have been victims are afraid to express themselves.
Pour plusieurs raisons.
For several reasons.
Et parfois moun nan capable faire arrêter moun qui viole là avant rive la kaili moun sa gen tande elle.
At times if someone could fall victim to a sexual assault, when they go return to their home, the assaulter would still be behind them.
Ça veut dire yo gen tan lage moun sa. Parfois tout et li gen doit pas gen possibilité pour le prendre avocat, pour le payer un avocat qui pour plaider pour lui.
But other ways that they would be able to address the situation would be for the victim to try to get a lawyer.
Et parfois, moun nan, li kon fon réflexion, li non kan, ou bien li an don quartier, moun ki viole la, li toujours été dans même quartier ensemble avec elle. S'il fait arrêter moun sa, famille moun sa li même, ou bien collègue moun sa capable bali en pile pression.
But the difficulty with even getting a lawyer to try to address the situation is that at times the victim of sexual assault would be living or being neighbor to the person who tried to assault her. So he could most likely live right next door, and the situation is harder for them to really address the situation because they're living within such a close proximity that they're afraid to find some form of help.
Et nous te gen yon cas avant tremblement de terre, yon jeune fille,
The situation that arisen prior to the earthquake,
3 messieurs te violé,
that this young woman was raped by 3 men,
et maman te fait arrêter yon la dan.
and the mother was able to arrest one of them
Pendant monsieur sa te nan prison,
while this man was still in prison.
yo te tué ni maman ni petit.
They killed the woman, the mother, and the child who they raped.
Ça veut dire, l'autre bandit yo te gen contrôle famille, hein?
That's to say that the 2 others that were still free had control of the family,
Yo te éliminé tous les deux.
and they eliminated 2 people who testified against their friend.
Avec question légale, c'est en Haïti, son bagay qui mande en pile précaution pour faire une poursuite légale.
So the question of these victims about gaining some form of help or going to tribunals is very severe because they're afraid about the situation that could arise from it.
Et pour le moment, nous avons plusieurs cas. Et côté que nous avons plainte, nous avons mandat, nous avons tout indice, mais jusqu'à présent, violé dans la rue, pour que jamais arrêter.
At this moment, we have several forms of mandates and we have sent people within the communities. However, it's still hard to prevent and stop these crimes.
Parfois, tout c'est négligence, bon côté la police, bon côté autorité, yo.
A lot of times, it's the negligence of the police officers that are there, unable to assist victims who have been sexually assaulted.
C'est une raison qu'on y a et KOFIV va travailler ensemble avec BAI et puis JDH pour voir comment quand nous gagne qui déjà gagne mandat qui gagne plainte comment gagne suivi qui capable faire avec eux.
And this is one of the reasons why they're working with the BAE and the BAI Empire and the IJDH to prevent this crime.
M'kwe lutte femme nan c'est une lutte qui long en pile. Mais nous capable di nous même dans KOFIV nous pas bailler les gains tant que nous gauche te dit nous pas bailler les gains dans bataille là. Nous croit victoire finale là c'est pour nous mêmes femmes.
The women's fight is a long one.
Et nous pas bailler les gains. Victoire finale là c'est pour nous mêmes femmes.
And we're not going to give up our fight in terms of preventing issues that occur against women.
Okay. Parce que parler en pile. Et me dit nous merci d'être que nous t'ai accepté tande parce que qu'on y a si une question m'a tendé et puis nous capable venir avec élément réponse.
She says that she feels as if she's spoken a lot and she thanks you all for listening to her story. If you have any questions, she'll be gladly to respond.
Thank you, Eramithe. Thanks again.
Well, good afternoon. It's a privilege for me to be here with you and to talk about the women of Haiti and the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti, as well as the BAI, the sister organization for IJDH that you've heard about. Today, as we sit here in this climate-controlled environment with safety and security around the world, violence against women is reaching epidemic levels. The big question that should be answered, though, is what will the students of UVA do to change the world? What will you do to have a global impact? And what will you do to stop this human injustice around the world? Well, I'm going to use this time to usher you into making a difference starting in earthquake-ravaged Haiti. What has been achieved with the grassroots women organizations in Haiti over the past few years, and most recently in the last few months or so, symbolizes the indestructibility of the human spirit. Few countries in our history have found themselves in such despair as Haiti has been. I'm proud that it's the women of Haiti who are in the forefront of building this new beginning for their country. I'm particularly proud to be sharing a panel with my friend, Eramithe, co-founder of the grassroots anti-violence group Commission of Women Victim to Victim, which is KOFIV, which you've been hearing about, and with Professor Deena Hurwitz, who I had the privilege of going on the delegation in May and actually meeting. And I thank you for inviting me to be here. This has been just an opportunity to see Charlottesville, too, for the first time, which I really have appreciated. Eramithe, through your example and faith put in you by all the women of KOFIV, you are sending a message of hope across Haiti and the world, and I thank you for being here as well. I want to share with you a little bit about the Rape Accountability Prevention Project that the Institute for Justice and Democracy has, so that it gives you some context into some of the strategies that have actually taken place and that are moving the work that we're doing forward, and so that everything isn't such despair, but we have some hope going forward. The Institute for Justice and Democracy is based in the U.S., and they work with an organization in Haiti, which is one of the leading human rights law firms, with Mario Joseph, who's the leading human rights lawyer in Haiti. I recommend that you Google IJDH, Google Mario Joseph and the BAI. It's fascinating reading just to hear about it. It's something that should be made into a movie. I get chills just when I'm in a room with Mario. He reminds me of what it must have been like to be with Thurgood Marshall during the civil rights movement. I think we're seeing this is a period of time where history is being made, and now is the time to be involved in the moving forward and seeing Haiti rise up into the position that it once held as, the pearl of the Caribbean. So, although sexual violence has always been an issue in Haiti's history, women and girls are now particularly vulnerable because women are living in the tense and the crowded conditions since the aftermath of the earthquake. RAP, which was the Rape Abuse Prevention Project, it seeks to deter future rapes and to ensure that perpetrators are punished. The widespread impunity that exists for perpetrators not only encourages further abuses and suffering, but sends the signal that male violence against women is acceptable or normal, and it is not. Everyone has the basic human right to live in safety, a right reflected in all the major international human rights treaties that you've studied or will study. But as we know, the gap between these rights and the reality for millions of women is very stark. Keep in mind that since the earthquake, many women who had lost adult male family members, their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, are now left to care for children and the elderly on their own. Dealing with the sexual assaults and the threats or fear of sexual assaults imposes enormous stresses on the women and their families. So there's the psychological and social consequences of rape, which are devastating, and then the stigma associated with sexual violence and domestic abuse leaves women incredibly vulnerable and jeopardizes the well-being of the families, fractures communities, and stalls the economic development of the nation. I had the privilege of meeting some of the rape survivors when we conducted interviews in Port-au-Prince. The stories they told were immensely moving and extremely painful. One woman, the victim of a gang rape, told me of her intense and continuing pain, even though, unlike some of the other rape victims, and she didn't endure physical injuries, her suffering wasn't visible. So there's still the victims that don't carry the bruises, that maybe don't have a broken arm, but they still need to be treated by the government as victims of abuse that need to be attended to. The Rape Accountability and Prevention Project is advocating in international forums, on the streets of Haiti, in the media, and eventually we will be advocating in Haitian courts. In an attempt to break through the shame and silence that surrounds the rapes, the RAP cases will provide a platform for women's groups to organize and influence the public debate. One has to recognize that violence against women is inextricably linked to gender-based inequalities. So every effort has to be made to break gender barriers and ensure that the voices of women are heard. At the same time, it's also important to change the paradigm of masculinity that allows for the continued stigma of the sex abuse victims. One strategy is to engage the men, engage the policymakers, educate young boys, and discourse about the dynamics and consequences of gender-based violence. RAP includes 4 closely integrated components. There's the legal advocacy, which Professor Hurwitz and I were part of, as well as healthcare, organizing, and public advocacy. In terms of legal advocacy, this includes criminal and civil lawsuits in Haitian courts and initiatives with international forums such as the UN Human Rights Council, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The BAI has started training sessions with grassroots groups to prepare them to participate as partners in the legal advocacy. That includes KOFIV as well as other women's grassroots groups in Haiti. IJDH also started legal research through the Gender Working Group of its Lawyers Earthquake Response Network, of which I am a part of. IJDH's investigative delegation, the group that went to Haiti in May, we started collecting evidence and testimonies for legal cases and filed a report with the UN Human Rights Council, and that's the report that's in the back of the room. The BAI also testified about rapes at a hearing before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in March. I said there were some positives to all of the work that we're doing, that there's not just despair. Because of the report and because of the trips to the United Nations Human Rights Council, I'm pleased to report just recently, maybe just a week or even a week and a half, we did receive a commitment to change the lighting situation in the camps, which is really big. Part of the situations in the camps, you have an opportunity for rapes and gender-based violence if there's not proper lighting in the camps at night. And to have a commitment to change the lighting situation is big. We're still waiting for confirmation and commitment to change the status of security, perhaps that we will get more security, but that's something that we're still fighting for. But we're very pleased that we have a commitment to change the lighting situation. The legal team also expects to file criminal cases against perpetrators and civil cases against officials who fail to fulfill their duties to protect women and girls against rape or even to investigate the rapes. One IJDH lawyer accompanied Eramithe's colleague to testify before the UN Human Rights Council in June, and we will continue to pursue available remedies in the UN system in collaboration with IJDH's other partner, which is Madre. The litigation that IJDH and BAI follows is an impact litigation model that was pioneered through BAI and IJDH in Haiti. In this model, we use a lawsuit to enforce individuals' rights, but also to force courts to open the doors to a class of people who suffer from systemic injustice. We deploy legal and political strategies that reinforce each other. In the RAP cases, the women's groups will take the lead in the grassroots advocacy, assisted by RAP lawyers and other community organizers. The plaintiffs will participate in the legal case, lobby government officials, bring their case to the media, and organize demonstrations. There are going to be real problems to overcome, including how to obtain enough evidence to gain a prosecution and how to prevent a victim's reputation from being ruined, even though she was the one who was attacked. Globally, we need to act to ensure that victims in Haiti achieve justice. We need to put more effort into and make it less painful for victims to take their cases to court. A prosecutorial response to such alarming sexual violence is vital if any semblance of justice is to be done, and more women with the right support do want to take their cases to court. Some women that I spoke to wanted to take their cases to court but feared for their safety. Once you explain to them they can conceal their identity in court or even in documents, they were definitely more willing to proceed. That's why we must step our efforts to make this happen. We have to ensure that the sexual exploitation and violence against women features high on the list of cases before the Inter-American Court. We also need to ensure that courts in Haiti take the rape cases seriously and that the interests of victims are put at the heart of the criminal justice process. It's not enough just to proceed with the cases. We need to bring about changes so women do not find the court process as humiliating and violating as the actual rape. RAP is a brave and pioneering attempt to ensure justice for many women who suffered monstrously. But there must be care as well, both in delivering high standards of justice and ensuring the process does not significantly increase the trauma of those who've already suffered so much. As survivors are called upon to testify against the perpetrators and recount the gang rapes to lawyers, healthcare providers, and investigators, many perpetrators have returned to the tent camps where the crimes were committed, further increasing the levels of anxiety. The scars of the gang rapes remain raw, and the survivors battle daily with the fear of pregnancy, disease, grief, pain, and suffering. There's also a need for the Haitian government to strengthen the health sector and to train the judicial system to deal with the victims in a sensitive manner. The courts must make special arrangements to hear the cases on gender-based violence, which will help to build women's trust and confidence in the judicial system. Furthermore, training judicial staff, the police, and relevant organizations to recognize abuse and the measures available for responding to prevent the abuse gives victims confidence to report the sexual violence. Now, in terms of healthcare, we're obtaining medical and mental health services for rape victims to prevent transmission of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections, to treat the injuries, and to develop evidence for lawsuits. We're working with Partners in Health, which is collaborating with other aid agencies and the United Nations to create a better system of referral and a reception for victims of sexual violence. During our trip, the delegation, we noticed women were given cards from different United Nations groups, just small little informative cards to indicate where a woman could go in the event she was a victim. And most of the cards that were distributed, actually all the cards that were distributed, had misinformation. So the information given on the card directed a woman to go to ABC Street and to speak with a physician. And when the woman got there, they were unaware at that location that how to handle a rape victim. So part of our efforts, we're working with Partners in Health and going to different healthcare locations and actually advocating to either change the card or make the location better prepared to handle the women. So we're excited to see that the United Nations groups are listening, but we're still waiting to see the cards change. So that's something that we're still working diligently for and advocating. Also, in terms of organizing, this includes working with grassroots groups in Haiti and international allies, including KOFIV, to create a movement adequate to support the women's fight for safety and justice. In Haiti, this includes providing resources, legal and organizational advice, meeting space, and international connections for the groups that represent the poor women. Outside of Haiti, this includes bringing together advocates that are willing to advance their the interest of poor Haitian women. This means getting law firms involved, getting local bar associations, getting the American Bar Association involved. It also means continually educating the United Nations as well in what our findings are so that they are more informed as to what's going on in the ground. BAI has worked with federations of grassroots women organizations, helping to develop the capacity to organize and to influence public debate. In March, BAI worked with 2 grassroots groups to administer a survey of over 4,500 families to evaluate aid distribution, conduct a needs assessment, and to systematically help those in need. The results of the survey were presented to the IACHR as part of general hearing addressing economic and social rights violations in the earthquake relief response. And we had one, you heard Eramithe speak about the whistles. Well, that was from an IJDH donor, and so we're really pleased that we're also seeing those efforts with people giving donations who gave 1,500 whistles, which BAI actually distributed to 6 different women's groups during a training session in late May to serve as a tool for both self-defense and organizing. We connected these groups with other international supporters who have provided additional training and organizing resources such as computers, cameras, flashlights, and walkie-talkies. Public advocacy is another component which includes shaping the debate in Haiti and abroad. In Haiti, public advocacy to date has included hosting several press conferences, producing an audio message about rape that was played on radio stations and on sound trucks near the camps, engaging with the International Earthquake Response System, and arranging a day of reflection on March 8th. There will be future public advocacy which will continue all these initiatives and add legislative advocacy, a stronger media campaign, and demonstrations. We're also helping make sure that Haitian women's voices are heard abroad, where important decisions about their lives, including their safety, are being made. IJDH and BAI co-produced a compelling video on rapes, and you can find this on our website, which, by the way, I realize I haven't given you yet, but it's www.ijdh.org. And with Digital Democracy, there are great videos that they've worked with us to give the story of the rape victims in Haiti, but also to give a sense to people that you can do something. It's not just hearing the story and for you to feel bad about the story, but to be actively engaged in helping to be a part of the solution. We are also working, again, with Madre, who's actually given quite a large sum of money. Besides giving money, you can also give legal research and legal time. The UN Human Rights Council testimonies that were taken were also guided by one of the lawyers from Madre. So that's just another example of how different partner organizations are working with IJDH and working with the grassroots organizations. The May investigative delegation that we joined illustrates also how the integration works across projects with a range of project participants. Our delegation even included members from several different collaborating groups, from IJDH, the Golden Institute, Madre, Morrison and Forster, and Trans-Africa Forum. The delegation, we camped out at the offices of BAI, where KOFIV and other grassroots women organizations, that's where they used to work until recently, and they were able to, because of another large donation, have their own meeting space now. So again, that's something new to report that we're excited about, that KOFIV now has a location. It doesn't sound like big news for most people, but to think if you have your own location, your own spot where women can feel safe to come in and meet with you, these are positives that are coming out of our efforts. After we returned to the U.S., we issued a press release, which and filed the report with the UN Human Rights Council and participated on radio programs in the U.S. and Canada. My role in this was partly from my desire to help Haitian women, but also as a lawyer, as a student, I was very engaged with the American Bar Association as a young lawyer. I guess just the student section. So I encourage you as well to get involved with the ABA at the student level. My interest was to just get involved. I wanted to know what I could do with human rights, and I didn't know how to get started and what do you have to do. And joining the ABA was one forum for me to get more information. Before I went to Haiti, we had the earthquake, and as a member of the steering committee, myself and another lawyer, we asked the question, well, how can the ABA get involved? And there's so many things going on around the world that we talk about in our section. But the Human Rights Committee, what are we doing for Haiti? And this is just another example of how you can be heard, and your voice means something. We had our leadership say, well, what do you think we should do? You present a proposal and tell us what we should do. Fortunately, we found IJDH and we found the Lawyers Earthquake Response Network, and we came up with a proposal that we would ask the ABA to assist with efforts to collaborate with IJDH. They would, some perhaps finance to the extent that they could, that they would solicit lawyers to do pro bono work and possibly even help train lawyers. I'm pleased to report that once two of the lawyers from the ABA went down to Haiti, we came back, we gave our report. We filed our proposal with the big ABA, and we were recently approved. Our proposal was approved to support the efforts with IJDH and the grassroots women's organization. So again, there are positive things that are coming out of this. It's unfortunate that we have to advocate so hard for so many things, but there are many positives coming out of our efforts.
Thank you. We do want to open up for your questions. There's just 2 or 3 things I wanted to add, just to kind of fill out the picture just a teeny bit. I want you to know that rape has only been considered a crime in Haiti since 2005. Okay, before that, it was just a crime against a woman's honor, which of course is not a crime itself, or an act against her honor, I guess would be a better way to put it. So that fact contributes to or has contributed to a culture of impunity around rape. Also, before, before and currently, rape by more than one person is punishable by life in prison. But you can imagine that that's never, that's never applied. Internationally, with respect to international law, Haiti has ratified all the major international treaties: the Women's Convention, the Race Convention, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And what's very important is that under the Haitian Constitution, upon ratification of these international treaties, they become part of Haitian law. And that what that means is that any conflicting law, any law that conflicts with those treaties, will be abrogated, so that the treaty is has supremacy. The other point that I wanted to end this with and open it up to you is this. To view this problem as an expression of, sort of the culture in Haiti, or that Haitian men are some kind of really problematic animal types, or as we heard from one official, I think it was in the Haitian police, maybe in that meeting, that what are you going to say? These poor Haitian women are just very promiscuous. That was a judge who said that. That obviously is really, really missing the point. And I think it's very, very important for us to look at the big picture of Haiti and to analyze the increases in gender-based violence as a product, or at least as very much a part of the serious inadequacies of food and water and housing and sanitation and obviously security. So you can't just look at the problem of violence against women simply as, in and of itself. It has to be looked at in the bigger picture, the social, economic, and political problems that Haiti faces now since the earthquake and really has been suffering under for many, many years.